Hour, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight from Washington, Christmas in the Caribbean. New details about American special forces on the move towards Venezuela tonight. A major military flex that reportedly includes Army Rangers, Osprey aircraft, and more. Congressman Jake Auchincloss, a Marine combat veteran, is standing by live to discuss. Plus, the Trump rule. The president takes a victory lap on social media after this morning's economic data, but warns anyone who disagrees with his call for higher stocks and lower interest rates will never get the job of Fed chair. Also, in black and white, a new batch of Epstein documents upping the pressure on the president, including revelations that Trump flew multiple times on Epstein's private jet, which the president has denied. The details and what else could come out later this hour. And blown away, the administration pulling the plug on 5 large-scale offshore wind projects, just as soaring energy prices become an issue in the midterms. Connecticut's governor says the move will raise costs for his constituents.
It's going to go up, and it could go up dramatically during very cold times when wind power is generating the most, and we're going to have a spike in energy demand. That's what I'm trying to protect you from.
But we begin this evening with the latest action coming out of the Caribbean, and the Wall Street Journal reporting the U.S. is moving more troops, equipment, and special operations aircraft into the region. This after President Trump last evening warned Venezuela's President Maduro not to challenge the U.S. Listen.
He could do whatever he wants. It's all right. Whatever he wants to do. If he wants to do something, if he plays tough, it'll be the last time he's ever able to play tough. But they sent their prisoners into us. They sent people from mental institutions and insane asylums into the United States, just walked right in. Venezuela took advantage of the open borders more than any other country.
Joining us now from our Mexico City bureau with the latest on the tensions between these two nations, Bloomberg's Eric Martin, who covers diplomacy and the State Department for us. Eric, it's great to have you, as always, on Bloomberg TV and radio. We already had what the president describes as a naval blockade surrounding the waters around Venezuela. What does this most recent mobilization tell us?
Well, Joe, as we first reported almost 2 weeks ago, this blockade and the first tanker seizure that we reported on and the interdictions over the weekend, one on Saturday and one on Sunday, is all about squeezing Maduro and his regime of very important income. This is basically the revenue that they live off of comes from these oil sales. And so if you can cut off their source of cash flow, that's one way to really try to squeeze Maduro and the people around him to try to convince them to leave, short of the other option that President Trump has previewed, which are land strikes. And this mobilization in the Caribbean is really just extraordinary. We've seen already 15,000 troops there, and now this reporting about special ops and additional cargo of additional deployment of troops to the Caribbean. So really continuing to see President Trump and the U.S. administration with a maximum pressure strategy to try to convince Maduro that it's time to go.
Well, we're going to talk more about this with Congressman Auchincloss in just a moment, Eric. But when you look at the hardware we're sending, whether it's V-22 Ospreys, a new round of C-17 cargo planes, and apparently they were full of troops, knowing that some pretty elite forces are from those bases at Fort Campbell, for instance, and Fort Stewart. We're still adding to this armada in the Caribbean, but we don't know why?
Well, what we've seen has been this articulation. Actually, in the last 24 hours or so, we've seen some of the clearest articulation yet from President Trump as well as Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security. She talked about tweeting yesterday, saying in an interview yesterday that Maduro has to be gone. Trump, of course, saying that if he plays tough, it'll be the last time that he plays tough, and the ultimate result is up to him. But we're seeing increasing indications, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying last week that it's intolerable, the behavior of the Maduro regime in terms of work with drug cartels, support for terrorists, work with Iran. We're seeing some of the most aggressive language we've seen yet, and some clear and emerging indication that the administration indeed doesn't want Maduro to just stop these activities, but as Secretary Noem and the president indicated, that they really would like to see a change potentially in leadership in Venezuela.
Eric, it's great to have you with us live from Mexico City. Eric Martin joining us now with his reaction to all of this. Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts, a combat Marine Corps veteran who served not only in Afghanistan, as we've discussed, but also in Panama, where his reconnaissance unit at the time partnered with Colombian special ops to train Panamanian security forces for drug interdiction, the very style of mission that the president has put many thousands of Americans into harm's way to execute. Congressman, it's great to have you back with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Are you getting any clearer guidance from the administration about the mission at this moment, with more American troops being sent to the Caribbean just in time for Christmas?
Joe, good evening. Thanks for having me back on. I don't need any more clarity from the administration. I know exactly what the mission is. It's blood for oil. This president wants to deploy the U.S. Armed Forces on behalf of U.S. oil majors in order to seize what are the world's largest oil reserves. Probably 20% of all proven oil reserves are offshore of Venezuela, about 300 billion barrels. And in 2023, the president was quite clear, looking back on his first term, that he felt like not forcing regime change and seizing that oil was a missed opportunity of Trump 1, and he won't allow it to happen in Trump 2. The problem is the American public doesn't want to do land warfare in the jungles of Venezuela against guerrilla terrorists. I've seen what that kind of tactics looks like. And if this president wants to make the case to the American public about why it's necessary, he'd better get congressional authorization.
Well, I'd love to ask you more about what these tools and what these men and women would be used for. As we just discussed with our correspondent in Mexico City, Congressman, you've got at least 10 V-22 Ospreys, the tilt-rotor aircraft used by Special Ops forces, and a C-17 cargo aircraft from Fort Stewart. The 22s are from Fort Campbell. These two bases are home to some of the most elite special forces we have, including the 101st Airborne Division, 75th Ranger Regiment. As somebody who's actually been in the region and been involved in drug interdiction missions, what would these men and material be used for?
The best analog, Joe, is actually nothing that American forces have yet done. It's actually what the Colombian special forces did over the course of the last 25 years to defeat the FARC, the narco-terrorists that Colombia was battling with. And what those deployments looked like was elite groups of small numbers deploying for 6 months to 12 months at a time in isolated jungle and riverine settings where they engaged in ferocious guerrilla combat with these narco-terrorists who themselves really were living off the land, as it were, really had no set supply lines. This is a style and nature of warfare that is vicious, that would cost American lives, and that I don't think the American public thinks is a strategic priority. There is a way to responsibly try to manage regime change in Venezuela to support Maduro over Maduro, and Maduro absolutely is a tyrant who has immiserated his people. There is a way to ensure that the Chinese cannot exploit those oil reserves, that the Iranians and Russians cannot exploit those oil reserves, but rather that they are used for the benefit of the Venezuelan people, of the Latin American people. But this is not the way to do that. What this is sleepwalking in to the same kind of mistake that George W. Bush made in Iraq.
Wow. Well, that says a lot. So you're talking about violent, jungle-based warfare to secure what you say, blood for oil, is oil reserves off the coast of Venezuela. So the president, you're suggesting, is lying to the American people about this being over drugs.
Oh, please. First it was drugs, then it was immigration. It's all a lie. This is all about oil. I know it would shock you, Joe, to imagine that the president might not be 100% truthful in all his statements, but he is lying through his teeth when he says it's about drugs. Of course, cocaine comes north from Central and South America, but the actual chemical scourge facing Americans right now is fentanyl. 98% of the precursors of fentanyl come from China, not from Latin America. There's 3 bipartisan bills in Congress that I helped draft that would effectively sanction and inspect and crack down on money laundering of those fentanyl precursors. This president has done nothing on that front. So if he was serious about narcotics and opioids and addiction in America, there's absolutely important bipartisan work that he could do, and I'd be the first to support that work in Congress. That is not what he's doing in South America. What he's doing in South America is trying to hook up Chevron.
Well, and of course, Chevron has a lot of experience in Venezuela. Congressman, there were 6 Democratic lawmakers, including Senator Mark Kelly, who put a video together, as I'm listening to you speak, urging members of the military to reject unlawful orders. What would be your advice to members of the military who are being sent to the Caribbean to spend their Christmas and could be receiving orders to attack?
This president has consistently put members of the armed forces in an impossible situation, whether it's deploying Marines from 29 Palms to Los Angeles in a violation of posse comitatus, whether it is subjecting them to an absurd military parade on his birthday, and now, of course, sending them into illegal operations in South America. The onus of responsibility does not rest on these captains and lieutenants who are receiving what they have to assume are lawful orders. The onus of responsibility rests with Republicans in Congress who, in private, know that this president is breaking the law and in public are too afraid to stand up to him. Last week, we had 2 resolutions on the House floor that effectively would deny this president the latitude to operate in South America without congressional authorization. Republicans refused to support it. Just cowardice, pure and simple.
Well, you mentioned posse comitatus. There was an important Supreme Court ruling today on the use of National Guard troops in American cities. Will this be enough to curb the president's plans to send them to more?
Certainly is an important blow against his increasing fusion of the military with law enforcement, particularly on domestic soil. It's always been plain, though, that again, the onus is on Congress. We've got to tie up some loopholes that exist both in the Posse Comitatus Act and the Insurrection Act and the Alien and Sedition Act that provide any president way too much latitude to abuse the military. This president has put that on steroids. But in general, Congress has a lot of work to do to reclaim Article I powers over the use of emergencies, over law enforcement, and over the military.
We should mention that that was another 6-3 decision, the court rejecting the Trump request here to use National Guard troops in the city of Chicago. Congressman, once we get through the holidays, you're going to be back in Washington a couple of weeks from now with a lot of work undone. We will have gone over the health care cliff, the Obamacare cliff, as it's being called. Premiums will be rising and part of the new reality for so many Americans. And there'll be a funding deadline as well for the federal government at the end of January. To what extent are you optimistic that any of these issues will be resolved before the end of January, or going we just start counting down to another shutdown?
The ACA extension, I'm confident, will pass the House, a 3-year extension. There's a deal to be done in the Senate that I think could also pass the House, whether it was, a 2 to 3 year extension of the premium tax credits paired with some type of income gradated sort of drop off, 400 to 700% federal poverty limit paired with some waste, fraud, and abuse provisions. There's a deal to be done here. The challenge right now, though, is that in Congress, we keep on talking about how do we divide up the health care bill between out-of-pocket costs, between premiums, between taxes. That's an important debate. The debate Americans want us to be having, though, is how do we lower the overall bill, period? Regardless of how you divide it up, healthcare just costs too much in this country. And there is where we need true innovative policy, whether it's about expanding community health centers to get more primary and preventative care, whether it's about bringing innovative new drugs to market that can deflect a lot of hospital care. We need to be thinking creatively about lowering the bill for healthcare by taking on rent seekers and middlemen and administrative bloat, and less about just how do we divide up a bill that is already just too big and crushing the middle class.
Think we can avoid a shutdown, or is that part of the dynamic here if there's no deal on health care?
Absolutely, we can avoid a shutdown. It's not in anybody's interest to shut the federal government down. It's not in Democrats' interest. It's not in Republicans' interest. Americans deserve a functioning federal government. We deserve an appropriations process that works. I've put forward plans to make the appropriations process better, and what it comes down to is getting away from this every year funding deadline and instead doing multi-year appropriations per agency. Fund the FAA for 5 years at a time, fund the NIH for 10 years at a time, fund the Pentagon for 1 year at a time, and actually provide some runway for authorization and appropriations, as opposed to having 9 months of posturing followed by a few weeks of failed deals every year.
From the birthplace of Romney Care, which we now call Obamacare, Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts. It's great to have you, sir. I hope it was a good Hanukkah and a Merry Christmas. Coming up, President Trump says tariffs are to thank for a stronger than expected third quarter GDP print. We're going to take a deeper dive into the data, what's behind it, and what it tells us about the Fed's next move. Coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. Call it a Santa Claus rally or not. I know it's technically tomorrow, right? But the S&P 500 ran up to an all-time high today, reversing an unusual end-of-year slump that we've been seeing in the markets. For details, we turn now to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. And Nora, it wasn't just stocks moving higher today. Gold and silver, both at all-time highs as well. What's going on?
Well, gold and silver, we know this to be a potential defensive play, but when you look at copper, that's actually a cyclical play. So what's really interesting is we see this strength in gold, silver, and copper. We had Scotiabank saying that gold is still discounted, and Jefferies saying that they expect continued strength in copper in 2026. So broad strength across the board as we're looking at these commodities in particular. But I want to take a look at the broader market. We did see a tech-led advance. We did see the S&P 500 ending about a half of a percentage point higher, NASDAQ up about the same, and then the Dow Jones Industrial Average up about 0.2%. Of course, everyone has their eyes on what a lot of people expect to be a Santa Claus rally that kicks off tomorrow and runs through the end of the year. But I want to also take a look at treasuries. There was some activity there. We saw the 2-year treasury yield rising to 3.5%, the 10-year treasury yield about unchanged, and then the 30-year treasury yield hovering about 4.8%. A lot of activity going on in the treasury space, but I did also want to highlight what's going on in healthcare. We had a big story that we were working through today. Novo Nordisk shares were in focus, ending up about 7.3% higher on the day, especially after they won approval for the pill version of its obesity drug shot, Wegovy. So we did see a lot of activity there with and analysts and investors really spurring this stock along. This, of course, gives the company a jump start ahead of its competitor, Eli Lilly, especially since Eli Lilly also has a similar drug, but they don't expect approval for that oral drug until March of next year, Joe.
Nora, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Nora Melinda with us from New York. Investors also responding to new data out today showing the U.S. economy expanding at the fastest rate in 2 years. Third quarter GDP increasing by 4.3%, more than most forecasts, thanks to higher consumer and business spending, calmer trade policies. The president responded to today's data, saying that tariffs, quote, are responsible for the great USA economic numbers just announced, and they will only get better, exclamation point. Joining us now with his analysis, Alex Jacquez, Chief of Policy and Advocacy at the Groundwork Collaborative. Alex, it's great to have you as part of our conversation today on Bloomberg TV and radio. The president, when asked recently, rated his economy A+++++. There were a lot of snickers about that and questions about the health of the job market. What did today's GDP numbers tell you? It's stronger than expected.
Well, if you take voters' word for it, that grade that he's getting right now is a failing one. He's more than 30 points underwater on the economy for the year. Consumer sentiment, consumer confidence is really in the toilet right now. If there is a surging economy, people really just aren't feeling it. And I think that's only reinforced by today's GDP numbers. You look at the front line, the top line numbers there, 4.3%. We're growing at 2.4 through the first 3 quarters, about the same as last year. But you peek under the hood there, and a lot of that growth is being driven by consumer spending, and a lot of that consumer spending has been driven by healthcare spending. You add to it, and Trump, you said, was taking credit for the tariffs. Well, in some way, he's correct. If you look at net exports, which was another big driver of the strong top line number, we saw a drop in imports. We've had wonky numbers like this throughout the first 3 quarters where companies have no idea what trade policy is going to be today, tomorrow, or next week. So they're constantly stockpiling, selling down their inventories, stockpiling again, and waiting for some clarity. So overall, strong number on the top line, cannot deny that. But I think underneath the hood, we're seeing some of those concerns, and we're seeing that K-shaped economy that people keep talking about. The wealthy, those with higher incomes are doing well. Those in the middle class and lower class are struggling.
I don't know if you saw the president on Truth Social earlier today, Alex. He writes, this is a long missive here. The financial news today was great. But in the modern market, he says, when you have good news, the market stays even or it even goes down because Wall Street's heads are wired differently than they used to be. He says in the old days when there was good news, market went up. Nowadays, when it's good news, market goes down because everybody thinks interest rates will immediately be lifted to take care of potential inflation. Now, you know I'm working on a question here about the Federal Reserve. He says later in the post, Alex, a nation can never be economically great if eggheads are allowed to do everything within their own power to destroy the upward slope. I don't know if he's talking about you, if you're an egghead here, Alex, but the fact of the matter is, good news on Main Street has frequently been bad news on Wall Street when the Fed is looking, because it means potentially higher or at least stubborn interest rates. Does this keep the Fed from cutting in the new year?
You know, I don't think this report on its own is going to keep the Fed from cutting. You got to remember, this is third quarter numbers right here. It was September. I saw one analyst saying we were putting on our suntan lotion on the median day that this data was collected. Now some of us are shoveling snow. We've had a long way to go, and I think if you look at some of the more recent data, including that jobs market data, and then some alternate consumer spending data, credit card numbers. I've been watching Christmas tree sales. It seems like they're coming in sluggish this holiday season. I think the challenge for the Fed here beyond this GDP report is that we have so much data that just wasn't collected or is going to be delayed into mid-January, and they might take a look at this report and say, look, you know, the jobs market is slowed, but still seems to be adding jobs, and we are growing at a decent clip. We might take this next meeting in January, hold the beat, wait to get some more data in before making a decision.
We saw some tough numbers from Gallup today. 36% of Americans approve of Donald Trump's job performance. Gallup's economic confidence index is down 10 points from October, down 19 points from June. The president talking about eggheads trying to destroy the upward slope. There are a lot of questions about what state this economy is going to be in the new year. Is the Supreme Court the best hope that economists like you have of ending the president's tariff regime? Could the Supreme Court, in another way of asking it, save the president from these tariffs?
Look, I am skeptical, and here's why. The Supreme Court, it does seem very likely that they are going to strike down the legal basis for the International Emergency Economic Powers Act tariffs that Trump has put on. That's somewhere in the realm of $200 billion worth of tariffs. I think the number is 35 million entries over the last 10 months or so. It seems likely they're going to strike those down, and it then seems likely that those tariffs are going to have to be refunded. But I am positive that Peter Navarro and Jameson Greer and the rest of the trade team there already has a number of three-letter statutes ready to go to 301s, 330s. I mean, they are going to recreate these tariffs in the aggregate, and that is not just going to put the same kind of barriers that are up at the moment. It's going to be a tremendous amount of compliance costs for importers who are trying to, one, get their tariff refund from the tariffs they've paid, and two, try to figure out this new system too. So I'm skeptical, although it does seem like the Supreme Court is going to overturn them.
We'll see if it leads to the great American refund. Alex, it's great to have you. He's Chief of Policy Advocacy at the Groundwork Collaborative. Alex Jacquez, we thank you for the time on Balance of Power. Much more straight ahead on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. The Justice Department dropped another big batch of files related to Jeffrey Epstein today, including some that raise new questions about President Trump's relationship with Epstein, along with the files which show Donald Trump flew on Epstein's private jet at least 8 times. The DOJ also released a statement saying, quote, some of these documents contain untrue and sensationalist claims made against President Trump that were submitted to the FBI right before the 2020 election. Joining us now with the latest details surrounding this fresh batch of documents and what we should be looking for with the rest here, Bloomberg's Ben Bain. It's great to have you. Ben, do we have a sense of how much of the complete collection of files this represents? The administration was supposed to have it all out last week.
Yeah, so it's thousands today, thousands on Friday. There were also several other batches that have been released over the weekend. So right now we have 8 data sets. There's more coming. The department was quite clear, even leading up to the initial release on Friday, that they were not going to hit that December 19th deadline. So we're just waiting for more to come. Today was very interesting, the documents that were released, and people are still coming through them. There's a lot in there. Email communications, information about flights, as you mentioned. It's really a trove, and it includes new details in terms of everything from some of the financial relationships that Jeff Epstein had, to really how this investigation was going on, in the Southern District, before Jeff Epstein died in a prison cell in 2019.
Ben, what system or format or process, if there is one, is being used to delineate what is released and when? We're not getting these chronologically. Is there a chance DOJ front-loaded all the Bill Clinton stuff and the Donald Trump pages come at the end?
I mean, part of this is we really don't know about the order with which things are being released. What the Department of Justice has said is that, they've tasked, I believe it was 200 people to be going through filings. One of the things in the law that was passed last month and signed by President Trump was that there are accommodations allowed for protections for survivors, and also some other accommodations, that for ongoing investigations or things like that, if there are any. So we are seeing really heavy redactions here. There are some very interesting nuggets. We're certainly learning a lot about this, and there's a lot of new information there, but there's also a lot of questions about, well, what is actually being redacted? No doubt some of that, is related directly to survivors. But there's also, a question about what's going to come next. What are we going to see in the next tranche of documents that's coming? And also, when is that going to come? There's not like a schedule or anything like that the Justice Department has laid out. We do have a sense that within the next few weeks, we're going to basically have all of these documents. But, it seems to be just coming and coming and coming, and we're waiting to see what's going to come next.
Yep. We're showing some of those fully redacted pages on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube. Ben, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Ben Bain helping to steer our coverage here in Washington with some long days when these files come out. And indeed, there could be more to emerge from this dump. Joining us now with more, constitutional lawyer Robert McWhirter, who's a practicing criminal defense and civil rights lawyer in Maricopa County, Arizona. Robert, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'd like to ask you about these redactions, because everything we've heard is that each will need to be challenged in court individually. And we heard from some of the victims today, when you consider the process or lack thereof that DOJ is following to get all these files out. One victim's name was left unredacted in Friday's file release, saying her name appeared several times inappropriately in the documents. And now a statement signed by 19 victims points the files did not include financial disclosures and that grand jury minutes previously approved for release were fully blacked out. Will the DOJ need to justify each of these redactions?
Oh, yes. I mean, they've done two things wrong. They have over-redacted and they actually under-redacted. The statute is very clear, which I've reviewed this afternoon. You're supposed to redact the names of victims, the names of children, and a few other specific categories. Well, it looks like the Department of Justice blew it and actually released them. On the other hand, those are the only areas where you're supposed to redact. All this broad blacking out of things seems to be totally contrary to the statute. Plus, I think they did the wrong type of redaction. They've done an electronic redaction, and I guess in some I'm given to understand they can actually unredact it. It's not like they took the document and blacked it out and scanned it. It looks like you can get behind the code and actually get that. So they didn't do a very good job redacting what they weren't supposed to redact.
My God. Okay. Well, there could be a lot more where these came from, Robert. And if all of these are challenged, this, I'm assuming, will be in court for years. You've got a series of lawmakers right now, including the two gentlemen who signed the discharge petition to begin with, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, talking about holding the Attorney General in inherent contempt. Does that have any teeth?
Well, it certainly does. I mean, I think Pam Bondi's law degree is going to be at risk someday anyway. And this just is another thing. She could be held in contempt of Congress and in failure to violate the statute. The trouble is, the contempt statute, to hold somebody in contempt, they have to refer it to the Department of Justice. And this Department of Justice probably won't go after its own boss. However, Pam Bondi is not always going to be the Attorney General of the United States. That's the nature of that office. So I would be worried if I was her. And if I was advising her, I would advise her to follow the law and her ethics and not the whims of Donald Trump on this issue, as among many others. And by the way, in terms of the quantity, it looks like we're only getting a fraction. I have heard that there's still 90% of the actual Epstein files that have not been disclosed. And the disclosure date was Friday of last week. So, they're just not following the law.
Yeah, it puts the administration in violation of the law in terms of totality being released and also being searchable, which I don't think is the case yet. The president was asked about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein just as recently as this time yesterday. He was at Mar-a-Lago, Robert, talking about his new Golden Fleet for the U.S. Navy. Remembering that in the files today, we learned that the president, before he was president, flew on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet at least 8 times. He had said never before. And here's how he framed his relationship just last night. Listen.
Everybody was friendly with this guy, either friendly or not friendly, but he was around. He was all over Palm Beach and other places. The head of Harvard was his best friend, Larry Summers. And Bill Clinton was a friend of his, but everybody was.
Everybody was friendly with this guy, either friendly or not friendly. I'm not sure exactly what that means, Robert, but the president has repeatedly said there was nothing to see here. Epstein was a creep. He had a lot of friends. Is that right?
Oh, it may be right. I mean, Epstein sounds to me, he's kind of like a pimp. And so what the president is saying is he was friends with a pimp. By the way, this catches Donald Trump in a huge lie. He is on the record numerous times saying he was never on the airplane, and it's showing that he's on the airplane. Now, nothing's coming up yet that showed that Donald Trump was involved in any crime, but it's showing that he's lying and has lied in public about his relationship with Epstein and flying on Epstein's airplane. So, I mean, it looks like he's basically friends with a pimp.
Wow. The statement from the DOJ is really something. I've never seen anything like this, saying that they released nearly 30,000 more pages. Some of these documents, this is a direct quote, contain untrue and sensationalist claims made against President Trump that were submitted to the FBI right before the 2020 election. What claims are they talking about?
Well, that's really hard to know. What this is, it's not a comment on the substance. This is the Department of Justice doing something that is not required to by the statute, nor is its law. This is the Department of Justice trying to put spin on the disclosure that they're required to disclose. So this is just totally what the statute doesn't allow. And really, that should go to the PR department or the political people if Donald Trump wants to do that, not the Department of Justice, which has a duty to turn over what are potential evidence of crime. You don't disclose evidence of a crime of, let's say, a drug dealer and then put some kind of spin on it to make sure that, your boss looks good because maybe he had been friends with that drug dealer. It's really, I think, actually inappropriate not following Department of Justice guidelines on this in the least.
Well, they go on to write, the claims are unfounded and false. If they had any shred of credibility, they certainly would have been weaponized against President Trump already. This is an example of the DOJ, according to critics, working outside the lines here. As I mentioned, there are going to be more where these came from. Robert, do we have any reason to believe that Donald Trump will not appear in them?
No, none whatsoever. In fact, the indications are that he will probably appear more. They seem very intent on really just trying to control the flow of information when the statute said they're supposed to give it. Now, they've claimed they have some 200 lawyers on this. I think this underscores not only kind of the bad ethics of what's going on in the Department of Justice, but the Department of Justice, and they have been my opponents for 35 years in court, are among the finest lawyers in the country. But Pam Bondi has gotten rid of those lawyers in favor of Trump loyalists, and I'm sure she's put the Trump loyalists on this. The others are in Department of Justice Siberia someplace, or they've left the job. So she has people that looks to me not particularly competent on the very issue of disclosure. So not only are they trying to spin this, which is clearly indicated by the statement that you had just read, but they're not doing a particularly competent job at disclosure, indicated by the fact that they seem to have released the name of a victim, which they're specifically by the statute told not to do. This is just bad lawyering.
It's going to be in court. It's going to be in court for years. Robert McWhirter, yes. The Supreme Court issued an important ruling today, 6-3, finding that the president's use of National Guard troops in Chicago is illegal. What will this mean for other cities?
Well, they can certainly point to that. I mean, you've got the Posse Comitatus Act. You've got a whole number of things. You know, it's very interesting. A good part of Donald Trump baits are these people who believe in states' rights. And they like to assert the rights of states and all this kind of thing. Well, they're not very states' rightsy on this thing when it comes to sending federal troops in to affect the citizens of individual democratic states, democratically controlled cities with democratic mayors, when crime rates in Republican-controlled cities are as high or higher. This is a violation. If you want to play the states' rights game, this is a violation of states' rights. And I think the Supreme Court, even though this Supreme Court tends to be very indulgent of Donald Trump's whims of executive power, yet has decided to put a check on this because it violates federalism. You know, we divide power not only between our three branches of government, but between federal and state government. And the president just can't assert power and start sending National Guards all over the place. Look, I have to make one other point. You know, the last time that a president had to send the National Guard from another state without that state's request or permission, like when a governor asks for help after a hurricane or something, was in 1861, and it was called the Civil War. That's really what we're dealing with here.
Wow. We always learn something when we talk to constitutional lawyer Robert McWhirter. Robert, thank you, as always, for being with us. Coming up, President Trump in legal hot water for adding his name to the Kennedy Center. There's that, too. We'll bring you the details. And we'll get reaction to the Justice Department's latest batch of Epstein files when our political panel joins us. Straight ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We'll assemble our political panel in just a moment. First, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. The Trump administration is changing the process for awarding H-1B visas, replacing the existing random lottery system with a new rule that favors higher-paid workers by giving more weight to their applications based on 4 wage levels. A spokesperson for the administration claims the current lottery system was being, quote, exploited by American companies to hire foreign workers and pay them less than their American counterparts. 85,000 H-1B visas are issued annually, and the new framework will take effect before the annual spring registration season in 2026. The U.S. says it's holding off on issuing new tariffs on China-made semiconductors until at least mid-2027. The latest signal, the administration is looking to stabilize ties with Beijing. The decision comes after a probe into China's chip-making sector launched during the final weeks of the Biden administration and found the country engaged in unfair trade practices that harmed U.S. businesses. In October, Presidents Trump and Xi struck a 1-year trade truce, agreeing to stave off high tariff rates and export restrictions on key minerals for chip production. Former Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse shared earlier today that he has been diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. In a post on social media, he reflected on his faith and family while vowing to fight until the end. Sasse represented Nebraska in the U.S. Senate from 2015 to 2023 when he left Washington to become president of the University of Florida. Democratic Congresswoman Joyce Beatty of Ohio is suing to remove President Trump's name from the Kennedy Center, arguing only Congress is authorized to rename the institution. Beatty, a congressional member of the Kennedy Center's board, alleges she called into the board's vote meeting, couldn't object to the name change because she had been muted. Her lawsuit names President Trump and his loyalists on the board as defendants, contending the vote violates rule of law and that the original name must be restored. Joining us now with their reaction to these stories and more. This evening's political panel, Democratic strategist Caitlin Legacki, former senior advisor to Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, alongside Republican strategist Brittany Martinez, executive director at Principles First. It's great to have you both with us. Caitlin, what's your take on this name change? A lot of folks seem to think this is very symbolic of everything that the president has been up to, whether he's putting his name on gold cards or on a building that's a living memorial to an assassinated president. Do those letters need to come down?
In due time. I think that, the reality is that a lot of Americans are really struggling with, paying their bills right now, paying for energy costs. And while Democrats do need to push back because every single encroachment on the separation of powers is a problem, there's just as much value here in letting voters see how much Donald Trump is focused on anything but solving their problems. And so the more he's talking about the Kennedy Center, the more he's talking about his ballroom, the more Americans are going to realize that he's prioritizing the very wrong things. And that contrast is good for Democrats.
Brittany, you worked for a former Speaker of the House in Kevin McCarthy. Is this a separation of powers argument? It does require an act of Congress to change the name on the Kennedy Center, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do think this is really weird. And to Caitlin's point, can you please go fix the economy and go do the things that the American people have voted you in to do? Why are you putting your name on the Kennedy Center? Of all the things that you could be doing, Republicans were supposed to be the party of law and order and also the party of small government. And it just seems this administration wants to go after graduate schools and colleges, the Kennedy Center now. Let's get back on track and get the economy roaring for the American people.
Well, with regard to the economy, there are some pretty tough numbers out in a new Gallup poll today. Caitlin, you probably saw this. Approval of Congress is going to be extremely low and that the president's having a difficult time. But specifically when it comes to the economy, Gallup's Economic Confidence Index currently sits at a minus 33, down 10 points from October, down 19 points from June, and the lowest since it's been registering, making a lot of folks wonder about the direction that we're going here economically after we saw even a stronger than expected GDP report today. Is this advantage Democrats in the midterms when it comes to the economy, Caitlin?
For now, it is. I think it's really important for Democrats to take note that there has been a change in which party voters trust more on the economy. Historically, it has been Republicans. And right now, the Trump administration is learning the very hard lessons that we learned in the Biden administration, which is that consumer sentiment and economic sentiment does not get better by just insisting that the economy is good. And so as long as Trump and his allies are ignoring the economic realities that voters are actually feeling, they're going to have a very tough row to hoe. But I also think that Democrats have to be willing to listen to voters about what they're concerned about, making sure that we're not offering solutions in search of problems, but actually taking steps to lower costs and make government function better.
It's interesting with all of the talk about Jay Powell coming out of this White House, Brittany, whether it's Donald Trump, Peter Navarro, or on down the line, they've called him everything from a sicko to probably worse. In this poll, just two members of the administration and the federal government, for that matter, that includes Congress, the Supreme Court on down, only two registered above 40%. The man who got the highest rating, the most popular senior official in federal government, is Jay Powell. What is the lesson here for Donald Trump, if nothing more than consistency and self-discipline?
I saw that, and I do think that it's going to drive the president crazy. We do know that he does pay attention to the polls. He does care what the people think of him. And, he's gone after him. Other people in the administration have gone after him. And just surprisingly, he has gone out on top in favor for the American people favoring him, I'd say. And so I hope that this is a lesson, you're right, in the discipline and maybe be monitoring better what he does and what he says. And that is something that attracts the American people to the president, is that he is so colorful, I guess, with your language, with his language, you can say. But I think there is a point where people do want the adult in the room who's going to find the solutions and not just be out on the campaign stump and criticizing everyone and name calling everyone all the time. We want solutions.
Well, you know, Caitlin, what's going to happen a couple hours from now is the president's going to be in a lot of people's living rooms on CBS. This is the night they play back the Kennedy Center Honors, which is now, I guess, the Trump Kennedy Center Honors. I don't know if the name of the show changed. But this is a good opportunity for him, right, to maybe cut down on some of the harder edges here when it comes to his approval rating. Is this advantage Trump tonight?
I think that the people that are influenced by these kinds of broadcasts are following what's happening with the Kennedy Center, and they're probably already annoyed by it. If anything, I think the optics are challenging for Trump. He's hanging out with a bunch of 80s rock stars and wearing a black tie instead of dealing with costs and addressing the economic challenges that families have. So once again, it's just the optics of this are not in his favor. And I think the Kennedy Center Honors is a wonderful tradition, and I don't begrudge him from going. But because he's so focused on other things instead of the economy, it just feeds into this narrative that he's not paying attention to voters and their concerns.
Well, I'm just glad Gene Simmons didn't hear that last answer, Caitlin Legacki. I don't know if you guys saw the Christmas photo. You've probably been to a White House Christmas party. A lot of people pose right in front of that door, the entrance in the Cross Hall. We saw the photo today of the president and the First Lady. They put it out on social media on the White House account. Merry Christmas. Here it is, if you're watching us on Bloomberg TV. Merry Christmas from President Donald J. Trump and First Lady Melania Trump. Brittany, neither of them are smiling. What's going on here?
You know, I think that they like to come off tough sometimes. You know, even it's funny. I'm smiling at the fact that they're not smiling. But I will say that I think that maybe is like part of their personality. Yes, they probably should have been smiling. They should be happy to be in the White House delivering results for the American people. Hopefully that's what we start to see more of. But, you know, optically, probably should have posted a different photo. But, you know, that's the Trumps for you, I guess, is what it comes down to.
What is this, blue steel, Caitlin? Is this the Zoolander Christmas at the White House?
I mean, Melania was a model, and so it does not shock me that she's not smiling in photos. But, you know, like Brittany said, this is kind of classic Trump styling of their photos. They always opt for formal and scowls, and I think it's just who they are and what they like.
Yeah. Christmas card, mugshot, all the same. Caitlin, thank you. Caitlin Legacki and Brittany Martinez, great panel. And thank you both for the insights. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter to follow up on all the stories we've been talking about on the terminal and online. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.